Do you believe art can change the world? So do I. On this show, we meet artists whose work is doing just that. Welcome to Art Heals All Wounds. I'm your host, Pam Uzzell. If you listened to last week's episode, then you know that November is National Adoption Awareness Month. As an adoptee, I really want to include stories of adoptees as part of that awareness. Today's episode explores a film about a Korean American adoptee. One of the big themes in this film is the role of secrets in families. I once heard a fellow adoptee say that adoptees hate secrets, and I'm still thinking about whether that's true for me and how much my own family had secrets, either from the outside world or from each other. How and why do secrets in families get started? Living with family secrets can really do a number on your head in terms of connecting with others. Thank you for listening to this season of Art Heals All Wounds. I'm focusing on belonging, and I'm wondering, did your family have secrets? Why were certain things kept secret? How did that affect your sense of belonging? I especially would love to hear how you learned new patterns of communication. Please share your story with me. If you go to my website, arthealsallwoundspodcast.com, you'll find a link there to leave me a voicemail. Let me know your story of belonging, and I'll share it on a future episode. My guest today is film director Christina YR Lim, and we're talking about her film B-Side for Taylor. This film is all about family secrets, and it was great to talk to Christina about why she thought that all of her characters were keeping so many secrets. B-Side for Taylor also explores transracial adoption and the unique set of challenges with that. The story revolves around two families. The first one is Taylor's family. Taylor is a teenage Korean American adoptee whose adoptive mother has recently died. Taylor feels desperate to know more about her origins and embarks on a secret search for her birth mother. Meanwhile, she and her adoptive father, who has his own heavy secret, drift further and further apart in their grief. The second family is a Korean family who moves in across the street from Taylor, bringing secrets of their own. In this family, these secrets create a rift between the mother and the teenage daughter. One great thing, though, is that the mother of the new Korean family is able to help Taylor experience parts of her Korean heritage as well as provide some much-needed nurturing for her. As you can imagine, at a certain point, all of these secrets collide, giving the characters some hope of understanding each other and healing the rifts between them. Christina explores some complicated and loaded family dynamics around adoption and identity. All of these issues are right in her wheelhouse of exploring the Asian diaspora through coming-of-age dramedies. Because this film is making its way through festivals, I try not to give away too much about the plot twist in the film because they're significant. But to help you understand the conversation, I will say that we find out that Taylor has been told a very big, enormous lie about her birth family by her parents her entire life. Taylor's mother and father made a pact to not tell Taylor about her true origins until she turns 18. But once her mother passes away and Taylor begins searching for her birth family, how long can her dad avoid telling her the truth? And why did Taylor's parents lie in the first place? These are some of the things we talk about in our conversation about Christina's film, B-Side for Taylor. Hi, Christina. Thank you so much for being on Art Heals All Wounds. Can you start by introducing yourself, just telling us who you are and what you do?
Sure. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Christina YR Lim, and I am a filmmaker.
Yes, and you have a film that you completed, was in 2023, B-Side for Taylor?
It was a long endeavor. So we filmed in actually 2021, but we were complete in 2022.
Okay.
And then our it premiered 23. It's a long process.
Oh, I know. I know.
Oh, yeah.
And I saw that film and I loved it. And
Amazing.
I have so many things that I want to talk to you about. Can you just give a brief synopsis of this film, what it's about?
Of course. So it is about a Korean American adoptee who lives in middle America, and her adoptive mother has just passed away about a year ago. And it's also important to note that she was her best friend as well. And so she and her adoptive father are grieving in various different ways and kind of isolating from each other. And of course, because of this, she's always wanted to know where she comes from and her origin story. But I think it's made it even more urgent. And so when a Korean family immigrates next door, she befriends them and is able to find a way to almost a portal to, her culture that she's disconnected from, but is also still dealing with feelings of guilt about wanting to know where her birth family is, in the midst of her relationship with her dad. And so it's the story about her dealing with that and then finding out where she's from. But that's where all the drama lies.
Well, I'm so curious, what made you choose this story? I know you wrote the film as well as directed it. So what brought you or what was the inspiration behind doing this story?
So basically, I was raised by my stepdad, who is Caucasian. He's been my dad since I was about 8. And I've been largely estranged from my birth dad, who I do know and everything, but pretty estranged. And so I just remember in my formative years, I don't know why my mind goes to my formative years, because I don't think it's something that you just deal with and get over. It's something that kind of lives with you. But I have felt it strongly in my formative years. And I remember specifically feeling really worried and feelings of guilt because I wanted to know more about my dad and how I came to be as a result of who he is. But in my mind, that really conflicted with my stepdad, who, is my parent, and just worried that he might, I don't know, think that it's me questioning who he is in my life. And so I think with the movie, I really wanted to hone it on that specific personal experience that I had. And so it kind of fleshed out in this way, but it's not necessarily autobiography of my own story or anything like that. So yeah, that's kind of the starting off point for me.
That is really interesting. Well, I'm adopted, which is what drew me
Oh,
to your film. A lot of things you're talking about, especially that feeling of guilt that you're betraying your adoptive parent, or in your case, your stepfather. That really, really resonates with me. And I don't want to give away too many spoilers about your film,
right.
but I have a huge question, which is that Taylor's parents were not completely honest. Well, they weren't honest at all about her origins.
Mhm.
Why did you make that choice for this story?
I think it was kind of twofold. The first reason is because in my own, I don't know if it's a cultural thing. In my mind, it is a cultural thing, but so much of the way in my home, love was expressed for better or for worse. It's not always the best, but it is through wanting to protect each other. And so I think often that can turn into white lies or things like that. And not always, but sometimes that could feel like betrayal or omission of really important information, things like that. And so that was really prevalent in my family. And as I got older, I saw that as a form of love,
Mm,
and so I wanted to show the complexity of you don't always do the quote unquote right thing or, the best thing for the other person, but it can still be intended with love. And so I think that's why, from her parents' point of view, the reason why they lie to Taylor about, where she comes from is really about loving and protecting her and what they think is the best. Obviously, it explodes in their face, as it often does. I think the other reason is because of my background. I really hope to be an adoptive parent one day. And I think it's interesting that often when we talk about Korean adoptees, it's usually overseas, which is, the case. But I think there are a lot of domestic adoptions as well. And so it's just kind of creating a nod towards that part of the conversation. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. One thing that as I was watching it and then just thinking about the film afterwards was that there's a huge theme of secrets in families. And you put it so accurately that they often explode in your face and they have unintended consequences no matter how good the intentions were in the beginning. And I love that theme because with both of your families, because there are two families, and I want to talk about the second family. So with both the families, they're keeping a secret and they're doing it in a way to kind of protect probably the children, Taylor and what is the girl's name? The Lee family's daughter,
Taeyang.
Tai Young. They're doing that to protect them.
Mhm.
And the confusion and anger and all those things that are a result of that secret, it does make me think, wow, in families, we have to do the hard job of telling our kids the truth at whatever level they're able to understand it, and then helping them work through that truth as opposed to creating a secret. Because I think in a way, kids always know that something's wrong.
Oh, yeah. I agree. I mean, I tend to write a lot of characters in their formative years. The mistake that I make often, and the thing that I have to constantly tell myself, is that children are much smarter than I give them credit for. Because, especially nowadays, too, I think kids are very instinctual. And so I agree. I think they often know, pretty much all the time, though. I agree.
Right, right. And I do want to talk about the Lees now because I thought they were a really interesting development in Taylor's world. She lives in a predominantly white space, the neighborhood, her school, and this family from Korea moves in. And in a way, she's able to transfer some of her need for nurturing and things to the mother of this family. But then there's such a strong mother daughter conflict in the Lee family. So I thought that was really, really interesting. And both of these two young women are able to help the other one heal in a certain way. So when did you have the idea that these neighbors from Korea were going to become part of the story? And how did you kind of visualize this idea of this bridge that they're able to connect for each other, these especially the two teenage girls? I thought they were amazing. I love the actresses. So I would love to hear more about this story idea.
Absolutely. I think, well, first of all, those two leads, they're just gems. Every time we screen, people are really like, how did you find them? Where are they from? Tell me their story. They're just, the chemistry between them is something that you can't just create, I think. And so we really, really lucked out by bringing them together. But in terms of Taylor's story being catapulted by their arrival, I really wanted to tell a story about a Korean American girl connecting with her Korean roots rather than her feeling, I guess, isolated within a white community's context, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
And so I found that if I were to bring almost like a portal for her, then we can really focus on that part of her journey. Because yes, she does live in a all white community, but I guess I didn't want to tell her story in the backdrop of, being the only one or something. I would rather focus on her, kind of feeling mirrored by these newcomers. And so for me, I really wanted to do that. The movie is a lot about grief and the loss of something, whether that's the loss of your parent or your home or, relationships or things like this. I also think the second part is kind of evolving from that grief and letting go of a life that you've lost and then fully embracing the new one that is either present or coming to you. And so I think thematically, I wanted Taylor's grief to also inform Autumn's grief over her loss of her home
Mm.
and the future she thought she was going to have. And so I kind of wanted it to be like a two-way street, if that makes sense. For me, I think it's Taylor is getting a mother figure through Autumn, but Autumn is almost getting to be able to talk to her former child self through Taylor. And so I was hoping that they would both go through an arc of their own by their interactions together and kind of coming out of grief together.
Well, some of my favorite scenes were, trying Korean food for the first time for Taylor. That one really, for whatever reason, just struck me right in the heart. To be a teenager, to be Korean American, and to have never tried Korean food. Food is such a portal to so many other things. I read your bio, which is very funny. I love your bio on your website. And you reference your 5-year-old dream to be a K-pop star. And you give a nod to that in this film, which again plays so well into a conflict between mother and daughter. I'm wondering, is that just a nod? They're like, oh, I used to want to do that. Or because it also creates the bridge between Taeyang and Taylor, in that Taylor's deceased mother gave voice lessons. So I thought that was another really interesting little way to make a connection.
It's funny, themes just kind of pop up. Some themes you intend for, and then some themes just kind of start evolving on their own. And then so after you've written or made a film, you rewatch it and you're like, wow, that is another theme. That's really great. But I think to me, of course, this story is about a sense of, I guess, looking for where you belong. But I think that happens in a lot of ways in this film. So Taylor with her culture and familial ways. But I think for Taeyong, it's kind of, I guess the way I can describe it is like the culture of her home. And so the way I created Taeyong is, I mean, they're all little bits of, I guess, parts of myself and my own experiences. And that's where I've drawn these characters from. But with Taeyong, I've had my own journey with, I'm the only weirdo in my family. I'm the only creative. They are all engineers or doctors and very STEM oriented people. And so growing up, I remember feeling sort of like the weirdo because I wanted to write poetry and, dance and, just do weird things. And I think when you're younger, honestly, even now, but, when you're younger, you don't get to create your environment as much as you do now as an adult. But I think the most powerful thing as for children or for informative years is, again, that idea of feeling mirrored or feeling like you're around someone or a community that makes you feel like, yeah, not a weirdo, So that's a thing very important. I remember growing up and my parents not necessarily being discouraging, but not quite understanding. And so I remember as I got older, I started to realize there are actually different types of intelligence and different types of gifts. It's not just academic or creative or whatever other, avenues. And so I wanted to kind of vicariously live through Taeyong's journey in trying to understand, but also realizing and claiming that thing for herself. But I also think it's twofold because I've seen it in my mom, who is incredibly supportive. She's always been supportive. But, I think we can focus on the children and say, oh, they need to evolve and they need the mirroring. But also parents have an arc too. Parents aren't perfect. And so for me, Autumn is doing her best from where she is. And through the film, she starts to realize, oh, my daughter is teaching me something. My daughter is teaching me that there isn't one way to be gifted, one way to be intelligent. And so I think there's a sense of like them meeting each other in the middle. I think that's why I wanted to explore that. And it's her way of finding a sense of belonging, like Taylor.
And it's so symbolic that, again, that Taylor's adopted mother, who passed away before the film starts, that it's about voice. She's a voice teacher. And it is interesting how that plays a role in the unraveling of all of the secrets, in that the different characters do find their own voice in this and are able to advocate for themselves what they want and what they need. And did you plan that ahead?
I hope so. But the thing is, as I got older, the more I started really, you would think that as you got older, you understand better of your past. But I think in order to do that, you have to understand others better. And so the older I got, I understood my mom's point of view a lot more. And so that made me reconcile with my own past, things like this. And so I think in order for Taeyong to claim her voice, I think Autumn has to grow as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like a two-parter. So yeah,
Right. Right. Essentially for everybody involved, everything either already has or is falling apart.
yes,
And all of the really dysfunctional ways of trying to keep it all together just don't work at all. You know, we haven't talked about Taylor's relationship with her dad at all, which is
yeah,
really uncomfortable as a viewer. It feels so uncomfortable. And I found myself really mad at him a lot. I guess I was
sure.
really identifying with Taylor. And I really I felt like obviously he's grieving, but he left no space for her grief at all.
Mhm.
And I don't know, what were your thoughts about both the character of the dad and then their relationship in this film?
I think the story is about Taylor trying to figure out where she's from and her birth family. But really, almost the subtext of it and the core of the heart of it is her relationship with her dad. Kind of like if one character achieves something, the other characters have to evolve in order for that to happen. So I think in this, or in order for her to figure out her birth family and her origins, I think that also means that she has to evolve in her relationship with her father. I wanted to make sure to humanize the parents, definitely Bill, the father, in that he's not perfect in any by any means at all. Over time, he needs to make space for
Mm,
Taylor's grief, as you said, and also acknowledge that, again, she's probably stronger and smarter than he thinks, and just trust her more than his own idea of who she is.
right.
And so I really wanted to focus on both of them being flawed. But I also think that the reason why it is quite an uncomfortable relationship to watch is because they're both avoiding each other, even
Mm,
though the only way to evolve is to kind of confront each other.
right.
And so, for the majority of the film, they're basically avoiding and kind of living in two different orbs when they really have to be kind of clashing and, really going through it. And so, I think that ties that with the theme of secrets. I think the reason why things get more and more and more disheveled is because pretty much all the characters are trying to avoid the thing that they have to do. And these secrets and these, quote unquote white lies just swell and swell until they can't be ignored anymore.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's really emblematic of life. I have learned that denial is sometimes not your friend. And so I think that is often how our lives kind of unfold. And we
Right.
are confronted by the things that we have to deal with. I wanted to make sure it felt like it's a grounded story that I hope when people watch it, even if they don't have this story of adoption or adoptive parent, or, I hope they see it and they're like, oh, yeah, that feels like some part of my family too.
You leave the story very open-ended. Why did you want to do that?
Pretty much after in every screening, including my own parents, come up to me and say, "Okay, so then what happened? Like, what happened?" And theater folks say, "You don't know what the show is until the first day of previews or opening night, meaning until the audience comes in. That's really the final element of the show."
Right.
And art is all about the eye of the beholder, and so I wanted to leave space for what the audience, how they would take it. And so whenever someone asks me what happens after, I usually ask them, what do you think happens? Because that usually informs what they received through the movie itself. Yeah.
Mm, mm. Well, it is interesting because the story kind of ends with a lot of possibility, but really challenging possibility because there has been a breakthrough between Taylor and her dad, but that relationship is not going to be either rebuilt or built in a day. You know, That's not, and the film very much feels like you're not telling a fairy tale here. You said earlier that, of course, these types of questions about identity and belonging, they don't go away. You might feel
Mm-mm.
them more poignantly at different points in your life, but you're gonna be kind of chewing on them for the rest of your life. So, I also felt like, well, of course, Christina can't go any further than this because it would be a very slow, long film about trying to process this. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? It's like because the film is not giving us pat answers up until that point. So you're not gonna end it just like, "Oh, this is great and this is great." And I just thought, "Well, how could she go forward after this?" Because
Yeah.
this is gonna be like, is she supposed to show Taylor for the next 40 or 50 years processing?
Going to therapy every day.
That could be the sequel. It could
Of
be a
course, of
series
course.
each week that
Therapy session.
Yeah, yeah. It was a really, really rich film. All these different relationships and the possibilities. And you've used both these words, belonging, loss, as we've talked. But I'm wondering to you how this story represents some of what you're trying to convey around both those ideas of loss and belonging. And what are they for you?
Well, I think a lot of my films, if not all of them, are about the Asian diaspora. And that there's a lot of complexities to that, right? I think it's not just about immigration, but also the generations before and after, whether that's the generation they left behind or the generations that are now seeded into, wherever they move. And so I think there's inherent loss and grief in that process and in those communities. But I also think that the other side of that is that there's a lot of, birthing and there's a lot of newness to the next phase of things. And so I think inherently a lot of my films, because it's about that process and the individuals who, lived through that, there's a lot of shedding and a lot of disconnection between generations and, parent and, children and things like that. And so I think those are really kind of ingrained in that community anyway. But I think the thing that I really want to always focus on is not necessarily the loss and grief of it, even though that is a big part, but what comes after. I think it's the reconnection, it's the rebuilding, it's the hope and the strength of the community. And so I think whatever I do, I really want to touch on that and let that be the central, I guess, energy of the story. And so I hope that's inherent in B-side. And I hope that whatever I do moving forward, that's always true.
That's a really beautiful thought. I love that. Looking at it through that lens, which is perfect for you because you're a filmmaker.
Yeah.
Okay, so Christina, where can people find out more about you and this film and your other work?
Well, B-side right now is in the middle of its festival. And so if anybody wants to check out the specific details of it, we have a website for the film. It's called bsidefortaylorfilm.com. And so, it's pretty obvious. And then my website is ChristinaYRLim.com. Yeah. So it's all there.
Well, thank you so much for sharing about this beautiful film and congratulations on making it. It is so hard to make a feature film, period, but a feature narrative film
Yeah.
is really, really hard. You did an amazing job.
Thank you so much. I feel like I've aged maybe 15 years, but I would do it again. That's the problem. I would do it over and over again. So
That's very funny.
thanks, fam.
Thank you. You're listening to Art Heals All Wounds. Thank you so much to Christina YR Lim for being on the show to talk about her film, B-Side for Taylor. I love learning more about the themes and choices of her characters, and I loved Christina's perspective on the way that every loss also holds possibilities. If you want to learn more about Christina, I'll have all of her info in the show notes. Be sure to visit the website for B-Side for Taylor to see upcoming screenings and streaming opportunities. Please leave me a voicemail at my website telling me your story of belonging. I'd love to share it on a future show. And while you're at my website, if you want to leave me a little something to help with the podcast, that would be amazing. You can click on the link, Buy Me a Coffee. Every little bit helps. The music you've heard in this podcast is by Ketsa and Lobo Loco. This podcast was edited by Eva Hristova. As always, this show was recorded using Squadcast FM. Art Heals All Wounds comes to you from Oakland, California, on unceded territory of the Choqueño Ohlone people.